live.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. This is a public meeting of the Tippecanoe Arts Federation Citizen Advisory Panel. We are convened today to review fiscal year 22 Indiana Arts Commission Arts Organization Support Grant Program applications for Region 4. I'm David Hunke, Board President of the Tippecanoe Arts Federation from Lafayette. Today is April 21st, and we are meeting online and streaming live for applicants and the public to observe. There is to be no contact between the panel and the audience about the deposition of applicants before, during, or after the panel meeting. This meeting will be recorded and made available upon request. At this time, I will individually invite each of the panelists and then staff to introduce themselves. I will start by introducing each of you by your first name so you can share a little bit about yourself. Monica?
Hi, I'm Monica Casanova. Currently, I am a social worker, but I've had many other careers. Most recently, I was a librarian for a dozen years. So I've implemented lots of arts programming. I'm not an artist myself, but I am an art lover. And I am very happy to be a part of this panel that decides how to disperse tax dollars for the arts. Very happy about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Lauren? Lauren, you're on mute.
Ooh, apologies. My name is Lauren Curry. I work in a kitchen, and I am also the executive director of Indianapolis Movement Arts, which is a dance and movement education nonprofit. I am also really happy to be here, and I saw some really great work being done in spite of and even because of all of the limitations and challenges of 2020. So thank you all for submitting and sticking with the work that you've been doing.
Thank you, Lauren. Elizabeth?
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Leachman. I am coming from you from South Bend, Indiana. I am the Director of Marketing and Strategy for South Bend Heritage Foundation. We're a community development corporation, a nonprofit organization up here in South Bend. I also have a dance background, dance and theater background, and do a lot of arts work around here in South Bend. So really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Damon?
Hi, I'm Damon Lincourt, and I'm coming to you today from West Lafayette, Indiana. I actually work in manufacturing. I'm part of the management team at a book printing plant in Crawfordsville. I do have some experience myself with live theatrical performance and choral performance. I've emceed or hosted a couple of charity events, and through my wife, who is an independent artist, have an engagement with the arts community in the area.
Thank you. And Jody?
Hi there, I'm Jody Taylor. I'm in Lafayette, Indiana today. I am currently the Marketing and Outreach Specialist at the Purdue University Department of Theater and have a background in nonprofit arts administration.
Thank you. I would also like to invite Tippecanoe Arts Federation Chief Operating Officer Ann Fields-Monaco to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Like David said, I'm Ann. I'm the program manager for this grant program. So if you're out there in the world and you want to get your comments after this, I'm the person to talk to. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Ann. At this time, I'd like to invite the Indiana Arts Commission's Deputy Director of Programs, Paige Sharp, to say a few words.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Before the panel begins, I wanted to share a few words on behalf of the Indiana Arts Commission. First and foremost, to thank our panelists for sharing your time and expertise. You've participated in specialized training to prepare for this work, which you've spent many hours reviewing applications and lending your expertise to ensure a high quality process. To all here and those listening in, we want to say a few words about why this year's panel process is so different. As longtime panel observers will soon discover, We've been very clear from the beginning of this upcoming grant cycle in our guidelines, application, and in training that our focus would be on what's most important right now, and that is to responsibly support our arts organizations at this critical time. For this grant cycle, that means supporting organizations that demonstrate they are operating and will continue to operate during the FY22 grant period. That in no way reflects, so as a result of that, those changes, you may hear very little dialogue and feedback. That in no way reflects a lack of dedication to a thorough evaluation process. It is merely a reflection of this unique time and unique process. So I just wanted to share a few words in context, and also thank you for all the work that you do for the arts in Indiana. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Paige. Now we'll begin the panel review. This is how today's meeting will progress. The panel will first review the application pool for operating support. Second, the panel will review the applications who submitted information for merit award consideration. For both processes, if a panelist has a conflict of interest, that panelist will be placed on hold while the application is reviewed. To review the operating support portion of the applications, panelists will be coming to consensus. They will use a summary sheet that has the results of their individual pre-panel assessments that were based on organizational resiliency criteria. The panel will come to consensus for each application to make one of the following recommendations to the Indiana Arts Commission. Yes, recommend for funding the application as is. No, do not recommend funding the application. Or yes, recommend funding the application with required modifications. The required modifications will be determined by the panel. This means IAC and staff partners will follow up with the applicants after the panel to collect information to ensure panelists' concerns are addressed. After a decision has been made for the applications, the staff will record the decisions. Once the review for operating support is complete, we will take a 5-minute break before moving on to the merit award process. For the merit review process, all applicants that are elected to submit the merit award consideration were assigned a reader, and today the panel will use the reader process to discuss applications. Because of competitiveness in the program, these applications were average score ranked in the top 10 for the preliminary scoring in the online system will be discussed today. The reader will provide their assessment of the application based upon the evaluation criteria. Panelists, please note, there's no need to provide a recap of what was submitted since everyone has read it. Just provide your comments. After the first reader is finished, I will open the discussion for final comments. In the interest of time, we are only looking for new, additional, or opposing viewpoints. Once the application has been reviewed by the full panel, we ask the panel to update their scores in the online system. It is common for scores to change as a result of this broader discussion. These scores save automatically. Are there any questions? Okay, let's begin. For operating support, on the screen is a list of all the applications that were reviewed today. They are in alphabetical order. To begin the review for operating support, panelists, please draw your attention to your summary sheet. Please note that we have one application with which one panelist has a conflict of interest, so this application will be reviewed last so the conflicted panelists can be placed in the waiting room. We'll start our review in batches where there's consensus. Panelists, I want to draw your attention to the rows in green on your summary sheet. These are the applications where you have all indicated in the online system that you recommend for funding. Panelists, please take a moment to review the list in green. Do you have any outstanding concerns about recommending any of these applications for funding?
No.
No, no concerns.
Nope.
Hearing no concerns, does the panel agree to recommend these applications for funding? For yes, you can
Yes.
give a thumbs up for a thumbs up reaction. Staff, please take note. We have a consensus. Panelists recommend the following applications for funding: Art Museum of Greater Lafayette, Athens of Indiana Art Studio and Gallery, Bach Chorale Singers Incorporated, Delphi Opera House Incorporated, Kokomo Civic Theater Incorporated, Kokomo Symphonic Society Incorporated, Lafayette Symphony Incorporated, On-State Foundation Incorporated, doing business as the Red Barn Summer Theater, and the Robert and Ellen Hahn Museum of Art of Indiana Art. The next group of applications have been recommended for funding with required modifications. We will now address each of the applications to ensure consensus among the panelists. Panelists, please take a moment to review the list in yellow. We'll start with Cass County Arts Alliance.
Is the Cass County Arts Alliance perhaps known by a different name within our panel review list?
It's not the Fowler Theater.
Fowler Theater.
No, those are not the same thing. There's the Cass County Arts Alliance. We had 2 panelists say yes with modifications, and the other 3 had said yes. So
Okay. And I have found them in the list. I
okay.
overlooked them.
No worries. It's hard to remember all of them.
Does the panelists recommend Cass County Arts Alliance to be funded with required modifications cited by the panel?
Do we read our comments about the modifications now?
Yes.
Great, wonderful. So I have note here, as a first-time panelist, I watched the financial review video instructions, and it mentioned to note if the balance sheet was not balanced, and there was a slight discrepancy in that. And then additionally, I saw a large projected increase for the Artrageous partnership, and was curious as to whether that was secured funding. And then also, I'd like to see the written pandemic plan for financial stability or sustainability as mentioned in the pandemic planning section, just as there wasn't a ton of detail in the short narrative regarding sustainability in that regard.
Any other modifications for Cass County Alliance?
Yes, I had the same concerns as Jody regarding their financial information. And additionally, this is a little bit more, I wanted to see more detail. One second, I'm having to toggle back. You know what, let me just let the my seconding of Jody's concerns stand so I don't take up too much time. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Any other modifications for Cass County Arts Alliance? Okay, moving on to Civic Theater of Greater Lafayette. Any modifications?
Hey, it's me again. So the notes that I had on this was that there was a pretty large gap between the projected income and the expenses. And ideally would have liked to see a more fine-tuned expense projection, at least in the fiscal year 21 original budget, because it looked like it had just been halved. And we know that some things, right, like utilities won't go down by half. But then again, who could fully anticipate the pandemic's effects? So then I noted that since this was a June to July fiscal year, seeing a 22 budget might be helpful, especially one considering a recovery period. There was just a large gap between those expenses and income that careful planning would be needed for.
Any other modifications for discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to Curtain Call Incorporated. Any modifications for discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to Indiana Fiddlers.
I'm sorry, just
Sorry,
one
David.
moment. It does take a couple of minutes to pull up
Okay,
in
sorry.
the system. So if you don't mind, I'd like a minute yet.
Sure.
All right. No, I've nothing further to request on that.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move to Curtain Call Incorporated,
I think we were looking at Curtain Call Incorporated, weren't we?
Civic Theater.
And I'm sorry, I did have it was also taking me a moment to pull up to get to my comments. So I have written, now I need to go back. So I want to just make sure we're on Curtain Call. I have written, even though the organization seems to be in pretty good financial shape, I was slightly concerned with the difference in projected versus actual expenses in 2020. It was a difference of 12,000, and the unexpected lease alone, they mentioned having to lease space that they weren't thinking they would have to. The unexpected lease alone did not account for the difference. Just make sure, this is to the organization, just make sure you have a good sense of what it costs to do the work you do.
Any other modifications for discussion for Curtain Call?
So just to verify for that, Lauren, you would like them to offer an explanation of the difference before they're officially approved for funding?
I was approaching these modifications not even necessarily as something I would need to see, but just something that any organization should. I guess I was approaching these moments as more coaching moments than prohibitive or like, on off switch things. I think it's just, this concerns me. It doesn't mean I think there's something wrong. I just want them to understand that they should have a good idea of what everything that goes into their work costs. But I think this organization should be funded. I just want them to have that knowledge going forward.
Okay. Our next group is the Indiana Fiddlers Gathering Incorporated. Give you a second to pull that up. Are there any modifications?
I have that I saw quite a large jump in the projected sponsorship income of 420%. And the membership increase of 133% is increased by the secured matching donor funds. I just wasn't sure if there was, if that large projected jump was due to increased board engagement, or do they have some hot leads going in, just how that number was reached. And then also in the expense column, the expense column for the fiscal year 20 festival expenses have been zeroed out. It says, I'm assuming that is because of the cancellation, but surely there was a starting budget at the beginning of fiscal year 20, and it would have been nice to see that as a basis of expense comparison, considering the nearly 60% increase in total expenses. The projected increases in both income and expense in a recovery year are a little bit concerning, considering the current pandemic situation and the proximity of the festival date. And I also noted that a written plan for safety protocols for this year's festival is needed, as well as a plan for financial sustainability.
Although I did not specifically request any additional supplemental information. I would agree that the projection for this fiscal year, given the continuing impact of the pandemic, is ambitious, perhaps within reach, but it would be good to see some consideration given to continued impairment of operation.
Yeah, ultimately, requested information would involve a written plan for safety protocols, the expenses for the fiscal year 20 festival that had been zeroed out, even though there's a total in that line, and the reasons for the projected sponsorship income jump would be the three things I'm looking for specifically.
Any other further modifications for Indiana Fiddlers Gathering? Okay, we will move on to Kokomo Park Board for required modifications.
I'm seeing I'm the tough one here. So I have here, I'm seeing the mentioned increase in outreach concert expenditures, but not a correlating income item, and was wondering whether it was like a carryover expenditure, right? Or are you spending a profit? How is this discrepancy addressed, and how is it sustained going forward? So please provide more information regarding how income will balance expense.
Any other further modifications for Kokomo Park Board?
None.
Okay, we will move on to Lafayette Citizens Band Incorporated. Any modifications?
I'll ring in on that. I did request, one moment while I pull it up. Okay, yeah, it seems to me that their 2021 operating budget appeared to show a considerable deficit remaining. And there should be some description of how they intend to bridge that gap for continued successful operation.
I second those concerns.
I did not indicate that I needed more information, but I did make a note in mine that was right online as well. So I third that.
Any other modifications? Okay, we will move on to Logansport Art Association. Any modifications?
Again, I'll weigh in on this one. One moment while I click over to it. Yeah, the provided balance information is primarily a single investment account. It's not truly what one could consider a balance sheet. If they could be given a good representative example of a balance sheet with some explanations of what's included and not, I'm sure they could provide the requested information.
And to second that, and to ask specifically how liquid is a cash sweep. That was one of their assets that they'd listed. I just wasn't familiar with. That would go a long way, I think, to understanding what exactly their assets that they can use really are.
Any other further modification for Logansport Art Association? Okay, we will move on to Prairie Arts Council. Any modifications?
One of the panelists had written they wanted more detail on plans or ideas increasing income. So I guess, can someone remember writing this? I can, in a written pandemic response plan, since they indicated they did not have one.
I too had some concerns on this one. Let me review quickly, make sure I capture them all. Yeah, primary concerns were lack of written plan with respect to pandemic response going forward. Also, only a single additional funding source has been tapped for grants to help sustain through this period, and perhaps it's been sufficient, but I strongly suggest that they look for additional funding sources to help bridge them through the period.
I second that. I have in my comments that from what I could tell, expenses in 2020 were more than twice their cash reserves.
Any further modifications for the Prairie Arts Council? Okay, we will move on to the Prairie Preservation Guide. Any modifications?
So someone had written there's only one paid employee. That means limited capacity to innovate when survival is at stake. On something about unstable internet. Can one of you remember this?
Yes. Okay. So I have, I felt that this organization operates a movie theater, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yes. I thought that this organization, I think the reason I noted there was only one paid employee was to try to understand why there was not a whole lot of creativity shown in terms of programming that could reach the community. I know movie theaters were obviously hit very hard by this. And they mentioned their unstable internet as a reason why they couldn't deliver digital programming. But I thought that there were a lot of lost opportunities in terms of educational programming they could have delivered, not even in terms so much of their financials, but just in terms of continuing to deliver to, part of the central pillar of this is, are you advancing the arts? And I was unsure of whether that was being done. So it's hard to tell people to just be more creative, but I would have liked to see more innovation from this organization, both for their survival financially and in terms of advancing the arts.
I'll chime in on that as well, although I did not request anything additional in terms of information and documentation. And they have shown some creative options for continuing to connect with their community. I will also grant that they may have shortchanged themselves in some respects as to the impact the theater and cinema and film have in their community, and especially in times of trial. As I read over their application, and forgive me if I'm inserting any interpretation, but as I read over their application, I thought of the critical importance American cinema had in the Depression era for establishing some great commonality across the United States. So I had some of the similar concerns, though I didn't request anything additional in terms of information.
Yeah, I have to agree with both Lauren and Damon that again, I didn't ask for anything more to any required modification, but that there does seem to be a lot of opportunity outside of just a digital or a virtual platform to advance the arts. And beyond that, I would have liked to have seen more strategy involving what the online virtual platform looks like. So I third their comments.
And sorry, one final thing, just for the organization, I don't know, hopefully these comments will reach them, but they must look into the Shuttered Venue Fund. And I didn't, was that on the list of, I guess that fund didn't exist when this application went out. So, but it does now. And so I know that organizations that operate a physical building are having a particularly hard time, and that is a very critical source of funding. So I just hope that they know about that, and if somebody is involved with that organization, let them know.
Okay, guys, so for this application, specifically as like a requirement for funding, what do you want this applicant to submit to IAC? Because you've had some really good comments about things they can do, but specifically for this application, what do you see is necessary that they submit to us?
I would love to see even just 3, I won't say a number. I'll say even just one thoroughly considered option for programming that doesn't necessarily involve the internet, or that involves pre-recorded content. Or if that is not possible, I would love to see them articulate a plan to ask someone to donate their time to update their website so that they can host pre-recorded content. Having educational programming in the theater that is socially distanced about, cinema history, having outdoor screenings, just any option that is creative, that allows them to operate safely. Just articulate one additional option for programming, I would say.
Yeah, I think just those are really great comments, Lauren. I think just for simplicity's sake, just a more detailed strategy for programming moving forward is what I would have liked to have seen.
I don't mean to offer too much of a counterpoint to it. Now, their specific mission is the building, right, and not film itself. So that plan could just include, for me, like another way to use the building.
Absolutely.
I grant that, but as a preservation organization, history is presumably part of their mission as well.
Oh, sure, the history of the Fowler Theater, right? And they did do a classic film in the building, but people were nervous about the pandemic and didn't show up. So I can see also why investing time, one employee's time during a pandemic and nobody shows up, it can be pretty, right? Like, well, okay, let's just ride this out and like pay the bills and see how we come out,
Yeah, that'll
It
cool
was a
your
hard
jets.
year for facilities for sure. So.
Any further modifications? Thank you, panelists. Our next one is Wabash Valley Youth Symphony. Any modifications?
I had a note on there that I didn't see exactly a balance sheet. I saw the cash balances at the end, but not a list of liabilities. If that qualifies in so much as the requirements for the grant application, then cool, we're good. But otherwise.
Yeah. I had a similar comment in my own.
Any other modifications? Okay, Anne, can you confirm this information was input into the online system by the panelist? For the
Yes.
above,
Yes,
words?
and I have taken notes to clarify specifically what they've come to consensus as the application is still needing.
Okay, thank you. Hearing no concerns, does the panel agree to recommend these applications for funding? For yes, you can give a thumbs up reaction. Staff, take note. We have consensus. Panelists recommend the following applications for funding: Cass County Arts Alliance, Civic Theater of Greater Lafayette, Curtain Call, Indiana Fiddlers Gathering, Kokomo Park Board, Lafayette Citizens Band, Logansport Art Association, Prairie Arts Council, Prairie Preservation, and Wabash Valley Youth Symphony. At this time, since we did have a panelist that had a conflict, we will place that panelist, Monica, in waiting room. And then we need to have, does anyone have, the other panelists have any outstanding concerns recommending the Long Center for the Performing Arts?
I did not put this as needing a required modification, but I did note that their reliance on grants jumped quite significantly into 2021, which is understandable given COVID, but just that I'd like to see the grant funding sources and donations break down as what they're trying to get for this year as compared to last year. But again, I did not make that a required modification. I don't know if anyone else felt that.
It's almost like you're reading my own comments.
Yeah, I made an assumption on the number in the grant, which was, I can't remember exactly what that shuttered venue operation grant is, but I think it was something like 45% of your annual. So right, like I did the math on the last year and I was like, okay, that's about that much. But yeah, breakdown and not an assumption would probably be not a bad thing to include in the future.
Do you guys want to go ahead and ask that to be a required modification to provide more detail or a plan in the absence of getting grant funding? You're still recommending for funding. You're just recommending for just a little bit more information.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll throw it in.
Just throw it in. I'm not trying to sway you one way or the
I
other,
got
but
W's for y'all.
yeah, if there's concern, you're more than welcome for us to follow up on it. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah.
I agree with funding, but with a request for some detail on anticipated grant funding, since it's a critical part of their sustainability.
Agreed.
Excellent. Okay.
Any other concerns? Hearing none, does the panel agree to recommend the Long Center for Performing Arts for funding? For yes, you can give a thumbs up. Okay. We can bring Monica back in from the waiting room.
She's back.
Okay, congratulations. We've got through the first part of our review process. We will now take a 5-minute break and return at 10:45. Good morning. Thank you. Okay, do we have everyone back? Okay, we will now review the top 10 applications submitted for merit award consideration. As a reminder, this is a different process. In this process, unlike the last, panelists will provide their assessment of the application's merit award submission and update their scores based on the discussion. Panelists, please refer to the merit award consideration list. We will start with the application from the Art Museum of Greater Lafayette. The reader is panelist 1, Jody.
My comments say, I see a strong commitment over the last year to keeping the arts available to the community, as well as a willingness to try new things. I very much appreciate the foray into racial and justice topics and the accompanying opportunities to support artists of color. Consider incorporating this diversity into the fullness of the calendar year to build a deeper commitment to this type of support. Great work in a very hard year.
Thank you, Jody. Any new or additional or opposing comments from panelists to Elizabeth?
I definitely agree with what Jody said. The only additional comment that I had is I would have liked to see a little bit more detail about how they were engaging specifically the residents and their constituents as part of their process more, and as additionally how underserved communities were being served just a little bit more specifically. But other than that, I do agree with what Jody said.
Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel?
Yeah, I'd like to chime in that content and the reach of the content, as you said, is admirable. But along the lines of what I think Elizabeth was saying, their outreach effort seems to have been directed primarily at those already in their circle, already connected with the museum or aware of the museum. And it would be good to see how they can reach the audience that is not already coming into the museum. I think one of my comments in particular on this was, it's with the restrictions on use of interior space, it's a remarkably good opportunity and one they could leverage to take art into the community.
Any other additional comments from the panel? Hearing none, please finalize your scores and update your online comments. And let me know if you need any additional time. We ready to move on? Okay, our next application is from the Cass County Arts Alliance. The reader is panelist 1, Monica.
Okay, let me bring that up.
Okay.
I appreciated what they did, which was they switched to completely virtual at the beginning of the pandemic, which a lot of these arts organizations were forced to do. And then as COVID-19 restrictions eased, they were able to move to in-person performances, but always allowing for COVID-19 restrictions. So my comments were, I appreciate that they help fund students attending a virtual art camp, therefore maintaining art education in their community. Collaboration extended to the mental health field with an outreach event. So collaboration was very important to them, and it was evident in the application. They moved their concerts to virtual performances when they needed to and returned to outdoor venues when appropriate. And I believe Cass County as a county is underserved in general, so that the Cass County Arts Alliance maintain an increased appreciation for what they already offered. And they talked about people were even more appreciative of those Sundown series that they've been doing for years, but I think folks appreciated those even more. and in turn, they saw an increase in attendance.
Thank you, Monica. Any new, additional, or opposing comments from panelists to Elizabeth?
Actually, no, Monica pretty much got all the comments I had, so I will leave it at that.
Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel?
I did have one additional thought because I agree with Monica's assessment that they have indeed reached an underserved portion of the community. I think it is wise for every organization to also undertake some efforts to understand the community that they need to reach and what the needs and expectations of those communities are. So something in the way of polling, research, focus groups, demographics, meeting with the outside organizations to understand needs.
Any additional thoughts from the panel?
I didn't particularly see the outline of which underserved communities were addressed, right? I mean, it's sort of just like this was for everybody. I felt like they're right in my mind. I was like, oh yeah, sure, it's free, and that increases accessibility. But I didn't actually see in the response, you know, addressing which underserved communities. And then there was mention of the community outreach event with a local mental health organization. I just would have liked to know what that was and who the audience was for it. Just you know, more detail there.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Jody. And they didn't specify the underserved community that they were targeting, but Cass County is a very rural county, so that's why I consider that whole area underserved, and the fact that it was free and they try to improve accessibility, I think it means a lot, especially during this time. But yeah, I just consider Cass County as an underserved region. Yeah.
And then, like, I agree with that in all the ways. And it's just a note on, you know, writing, you know, make sure to clarify those kind of details so that, you know, if we weren't familiar with Logansport, you know, that
sure.
we would be able to do that.
Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel? Seeing none, please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Okay, our next application is the Civic Theater of Greater Lafayette. The reader is panelist 1, Lauren.
For this merit application, I think the only, I just had that they have a great mix of digital and in-person modified programming. And again, the only ding that I had was not so much that they weren't serving underserved communities, but there was just no mention of it. And I think I would like to combine Monica and Damon's comments from before. And this is both for, this is a note my organization could take, and this is also even a note for the Arts Commission, is I think field-wide for nonprofits, we all have to do better at tracking who it is that we serve. And it can be uncomfortable to ask people demographic information, but we have to start asking for this purpose, for grant purposes. And I think Monica makes such an excellent point that if your entire county is quite underserved, then you should know that and say that. And I don't want to, you know, ding the organization. Sorry, I'm going back to an organization we're not evaluating. But in terms of this organization, I would have just asked for better tracking of their demographics and just an overt detail, just a mention at all of who it is that you are serving.
Yeah, I'll jump in too, because your point is well made that it can be difficult to know and understand the demographics of those who are participating, your audience. What I have seen from other organizations at times is if they serve a given community, a given county, even understanding the demographic makeup and repeating for us the demographic makeup of that community or that county is itself a good statement that you understand the community you're serving.
Exactly. Yeah.
Any new additional or opposing comments from panelists to Monica?
I see what Lauren is saying, and I agree with it generally. I think we have to be careful on when we do our assessments and evaluations, because we don't want to burden our participants with surveys every time they come, because then they get survey fatigue. So I think we have to be intentional when we do those evaluations and survey who our attendees are. But yes, we definitely, as a field, even though I'm not in the field, should understand who we're serving and who we're trying to serve, and understand who our demographics are. I'm just not sure that we need to do it every time. And I understand, Lauren, that's not a comment that you made. I'm just saying that there has to be some caution against surveying every single time. The other thing, as far as underserved, Damon mentioned that there was no mention of that, and that is true. I do want to point out.
Oh, I didn't say there was no mention
for the Civic Theater.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
that wasn't genuinely my comment.
Okay. But I do want to point out with the Civic, and I think a lot of other organizations, they took some lessons from the pandemic as far as what they can keep as virtual. And Civic is one of those organizations. So I think they're going to continue to apply some of those virtual programming options. And I think that's awesome. I think that the pandemic was difficult for everybody, particularly arts and arts organizations, but there were some lessons to be gleaned, and the Civic Theater and other organizations are applying those lessons, and I think that's great.
Yeah, you know, at the risk of lecturing, which I'm not qualified for, but I think it's a good comment for all the arts organizations pursuing this merit. That standard of reaching an underserved community is a twofold challenge. Part of it is actually having the channels that connect with that community. But probably even the more challenging part is delivering content that you know to be effective with that community. We may go into it thinking, oh, well, I'll pull in diverse content without genuinely understanding that that is what the community needs, wants, or hasn't received.
Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel?
I identified a sort of niche underserved community, which is I identify as something that's new during the pandemic, and that's in particular with K through 12 students who may be e-learning, who don't receive arts or specials education in a great way. So, right, I kind of looked at it through that lens as well, you know, for what it's worth.
Additional thoughts? Thank you, panelists. Please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Our next application is the Indiana Fiddlers Gathering Incorporated. The reader is panelist 1, Monica.
I'm bringing up the application here. Okay, with the Fiddlers, I was very excited to see how innovative they were in terms of changing their 3-day music festival to the Ungathering and making it a virtual 1-day event, and still trying to commit to some of the artists that they had hired by giving them the space and paying them for their time. So I love this idea of the Ungathering and still trying to support some of those artists that we would have seen in person. Let's see. So I appreciate it that they were very supportive and conscientious of those bands that were no longer going to have access to getting paid, and they were the fact that they were conscious of that and trying to make sure that they got paid. I think that says a lot about the organization. I love their resiliency, how they saw that there wasn't a possibility to do this live music festival, but switched it to an online concert. And then they had an opportunity to really focus on creating a YouTube channel, which they did. The YouTube channel doesn't have a lot of content, but there is an opportunity there, and I think they're going to leverage it. So I was very happy and excited to see what they had done and what they're still trying to do.
Okay, any new or additional opposing comments from panelists to Lauren?
I second all of that. I loved the Ungathering. I loved that they are telling the stories both of people within the organization and their audience members. Again, and I'm an arts administrator, so I think arts administrators sometimes forget that not all organizations like are run by people who think about this stuff all day necessarily. And I know they're experiencing a leadership transition, as they noted in their application as well. However, I think the Arts Commission can do all of these organizations a service by telling them, just look around. If I kind of assumed that they're serving an underserved audience because their festival was outdoors, I kind of assumed it's low cost. I assume this county doesn't have a lot of arts programming, but they can't leave that up to the grant panelists. You can have a grant panelist that doesn't even live in Indiana and has no idea where you're situated. So I think it's important for the Arts Commission to help organizations to understand where these institutions are situated, and if you are, just by virtue of your location, serving an underserved community. That was my only ding in their merit, was that they just didn't mention, and I think it's probably because they don't know. And yes, tracking and surveying is difficult. You have to figure out when to do it, how to do it. But I think that is, a lot of organizations did not really address this. If a lot of the organizations that I dinged, it was because of this. And I think it's not even really, I think it's more on the commission to help organizations understand their position in their own communities. Sorry, that was very lengthy, but that's it.
Additional thoughts from the rest of the panel?
One additional comment that I offered, I too saluted their creativity in still delivering their available content. It's worth noting, though, the YouTube channel they set up, YouTube itself can be exclusive for some people, given the requirements it takes to connect. So I'd suggested that they also look for channels like, plain old free radio broadcast, etc., if that's an avenue to get their content across.
I had two notes about the archive will be a nice way for future preservation initiatives, but that also a forward-looking way to serve folks with disabilities, illness, or other restrictions on travel outdoors. Those would probably include like live streaming the event as it happens, or right, just a more forward-looking way to serve that community, as opposed to just remember back in the day that was good, wasn't it? Right. Keep them involved with it. And then the other one was just like a note on making sure that integrate the costs of that archive in terms of making sure that the artists are compensated for releasing that, the rights for it, the sound engineering or video engineering, just start in a long-term way in integrating those things into the financial plan.
You've touched on a really excellent point there. So many of our organizations do maintain their own histories, their own archives. Something every organization should keep in mind is that such archives are actually part of the community history. So, reach out to libraries, historical societies, etc. for, please forgive him for the opportunity to keep and use those archives in those contexts too.
Additional thoughts? Thank you, panelists. Please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Our next application is the Kokomo Civic Theater. The reader is panelist 1, Lauren.
Sorry, give me one moment.
Okay.
Working. And I also apologize to my fellow panelists for keeping my mic open this whole time. I don't know how y'all do it. I cannot toggle back and forth with any degree of success. Okay. Program at the retirement community is a good mix of tailoring a presentation to a specific group's needs, good mix of in-person and digital presentation. Love new work being created that addresses contemporary life, how to stop a virus, and that incorporated local businesses. So I think actually this was a better than average merit application, and I don't have any other comments.
Okay, any new, additional, or opposing comments from panelists to Jody?
I said, this is really great work using the art form and mission to serve the immediate community needs while improving relationships and earning new patrons. The numbers on the online events are very impressive and difficult to achieve. There's obviously a lot of support from the area for this organization. I hope the thoughtfulness and extraordinary effort yields invigorated audiences in the post-COVID world.
Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel? Okay, thank you, panelists. Please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Our next group is the Kokomo Park Band. And the reader is panelist 1, Lauren.
Yes, working. Okay. The organization has been bending over backwards to perform for the public and give work to musicians. Be careful about claiming an underserved population in your audience base if your performance or programming was not specifically targeted with them or made with them in mind. I think this was in reference to, they noted that they play outdoors, which is free for anybody to walk up to. So yes, that does increase access. But I think, again, I would challenge the commission to be more clear with organizations. And I know that the commission does provide videos and tools and guidance, but to be more explicit with organizations that it's one thing to make programming that let's say working class or working poor people can access, but do they access it? And did you make it for them specifically? There is a difference there. But otherwise, I thought this was a good merit application.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Any new additional or opposing comments from panelists two? Elizabeth?
I have to agree with what Lauren said. I think it was obvious that they took community input to heart and made sure that their events were accessible, even though, as Lauren said, accessibility does not mean that it was made for an underserved community. But I thought that the drive-by concerts were a great idea, as was doing the radio feed for the concerts. They have maintained and sounds like created many great collaborations. And within these collaborations, they're working towards bringing arts to some of those underserved communities or those with more barriers to accessing the arts, like the retirement facility and the public housing community, which traditionally is low income and therefore harder to access the arts. So yeah, I thought it was a really nicely done merit application.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel? Okay, seeing none, please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Our next application is the Kokomo Symphonic Society Incorporated. The reader is panelist one, Monica.
You know, I appreciated the organizations that went for the Merit Award consideration. I'm not sure that Kokomo Symphony did enough to merit this award. I see mention of a free city concert, which again provides access to folks in the park or in the vicinity, and the fact that they also partnered with the city, that was great. But other than that live performance, I don't see that they did anything else. I may be wrong, but oh, the music video. I tried to look for that music video. I could not find it on their pages. I went to the Historical Society. I could not find that music video, which would have been interesting to see. But this was the challenging proposal for me, because I want to provide kudos to the organizations who were ambitious to request the Merit Award. I'm just not sure that I wasn't convinced that Kokomo Symphony merits the Merit Award consideration.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Any new additional or opposing comments from panelists two, Damon?
Very similar to Monica's comments. Their outreach to their connection with the community and any underserved portions of the community was essentially passive in nature. They didn't actively seek the right channel, the right content, the right audience. So while there may indeed be great merits in how they made their content available, it was passive.
Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel? Okay, seeing none, please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Our next application is Logansport Art Association. The reader is panelist one, Jody.
Great projects and initiatives. There's a lot of kindness and creativity with this organization. I would have liked more clarity regarding the details of what services were provided to the Haitian, Burmese, and Karen communities mentioned, and I'm also unclear as to whether the art experiences at the nursing homes were prior to the pandemic or during the pandemic. So scoring the service to underserved communities was a little difficult. I love the use of art to build productive dialogue during a very divisive election season.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Any new additional or opposing comments from panelists to Monica?
Sorry, Dave, I'm bringing up my application here.
That's okay.
I don't have any particular new comments. I do just want to second what Jody said about the outreach to the Burmese population. I would have liked to have learned how their ties to the Burmese, the Haitian, and Karen community changed their approach to the type of classes or art trends that they featured. It seemed kind of one-dimensional. I wanted more information. That was the only thing I wrote.
Okay, thank you. Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel? Okay, seeing none, please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Our next application is On State Foundation Incorporated, doing business as the Red Barn Summer Theater. The reader is panelist 1, Lauren.
I don't know what happened. My comments were incomplete, but as I'm looking here, I did reference their partnership with the library, which Jody knows libraries are serve whatever community they're in so many ways. So I think that is was an excellent choice for the barn. I see here their preview night is again tailored to the retirement or senior community with limited mobility, which is great because this I think was one of the only organizations to specifically address access in terms of able-bodiedness or not. And the scores that I think the programming, they're definitely advancing the arts. They have a good mix of digital and in-person. So even though my comments were incomplete for some reason, I think this was an above average merit application.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. Any new additional or opposing comments from panelists to Monica?
My comments were the various options that were presented as possibilities at the beginning of the consideration application do not constitute delivering arts experiences now. So they explored what we could do, but I didn't see it as this is what we're doing now. However, I am impressed that there are different partnerships, as Lauren already mentioned, with the library, Mentoring Matters, and the nursing homes. I think all of those audiences are broad enough and reflect different communities who are typically underserved.
Okay, thank you. Any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel?
I second Monica's thoughts there. I do really appreciate the relationships that they built over the course of last year and their plans going forward to reach these underserved populations. But in terms of a 2020 season, they weren't able to bring anything to fruition. So I think they did a great foundation laying and used their time wisely, but I don't think that as it pertains to the merit award that it specifically delivered anything over last year.
Yeah, I'll just throw into that. I agree with Jody that, and everyone else's comments that the partnerships is great, but they made this list of, strategies that they are exploring, but they didn't demonstrate any sort of anything that shows how they plan to achieve or have achieved any of those strategies. So I think that needs to be explored more before a merit award is considered.
Thank you, fellow panelists. Yeah, I see that these are things that they could do. I think, I don't know how, I just must not have, I must have been staying up too late. But yes, I think that obviously one of the things is, are you advancing the art form? And if you are not operating, then you're not. At least not in this year. So thank you. I'm going to need to update my score in terms of that.
I'll jump in with let's call it an opposing viewpoint, only in that, yes, while 2020 might not have shown the results of the labor, I think we all know it takes a lot of groundwork to establish partnerships that yield fruit later. So I'd say that was their work of 2020, and it appeared admirable to me.
Agreed. I looked at the merit award as a way to, not officially, but in some way reimburse organizations who had to restructure their programming and probably had unbudgeted expenditures that this could help recuperate. And, while the work they did was fantastic, right? I have a retroactive lens in terms of, how can we support what they did that they didn't know they were going to do in the last grant cycle.
I think what was challenging for me, they just seem hypotheticals, like we could do this or we could do that, or, they weren't concrete.
Yeah, what bothered me was that they said these options are being explored or something. There wasn't any evidence that they were going to attempt to do those into the future.
And in terms of that, I know that some of these programs are things that have already existed for them. So they existed in the prior season to 2020. So the 2019 season did see a lot of those things come to fruition. So they are good programs that are ongoing when they can be, right?
Any additional comments? Okay, please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Our last application is the Prairie Arts Council. The reader is panelist 1 is Elizabeth.
Yeah, so give me a second here. Let's see, in response to the pandemic, they moved receptions and art shows online, but I did like that they also offered a chance to see the artwork hanging in the gallery or library in a safe way. That's a great way to continue building, meaningful relationships in person, even during a pandemic. And that was specifically in response to art teacher concerns. So I was glad to see that they took those to heart. It's obvious that they are taking community changes to heart by having an expanded board. And I particularly thought offering classes to those at-risk high school students was a great program to ensure that those youth have access to the arts. However, I still would like to see more evidence of a broader outreach effort for those underserved communities beyond just adding a single member to your board of directors. That's a great first step, but I think that there's still a lot of work to be done on that front, even with the other partnerships they had built.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Any new, additional, or opposing comments from panelists 2, Lauren?
Yes, working. Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I had. More detail on the populations and the board member. Let's see, would have liked more detail on which underserved populations this new board member has connected the organization with and what constitutes this connection. Yeah.
Okay, any additional thoughts from the rest of the panel?
Just a corroborating statement that adding to the board and changing the board makeup is a good and admirable step. It's not the same as engagement.
Any additional thoughts? Okay, panelists, please finalize your scores and update your online comments. Okay, this concludes our merit award considerations. And also this concludes the Region 4 Arts Organization Support Panel. Applicants will be notified of the status of their grants in early July. If you have any questions, please contact Ann Fields Monaco at the Tippecanoe Arts Federation. Any other comments? Okay, thank you all for attending.
The stream has ended.